Good afternoon, and welcome to another Saturday edition of Women's Atheist Unload on Skeptic Haven. I am your host, Rion, and today we have the privilege of hosting a renowned scholar and spiritual leader and friend of the show, Rabbi Mike Harvey. We'll be addressing the mistranslations and misconceptions of Scripture that have helped to create anti-LGBTQIA rhetoric that has now infiltrated our government. Are all translations created equal? Does the Bible prohibit queer love? Don't go anywhere, and Rabbi Mike will enlighten us. See you soon.
I know you told your friend you're not okay, and tell me what's wrong and why you never said you felt that way. And guess you're trying to stay strong and fake a smile until I look away. But I've known you too long, it hurts to watch your blue eyes fade to gray.
Well, hello and welcome back to another Saturday production of Education Entertainment on Skeptic Haven. Our special guest, Rabbi Mike Harvey, is a passionate advocate for social justice and inclusivity within religious communities, even writing a best-selling book. Yes, I have it, called Let's Talk, A Rabbi Speaks to Christians. He's a teacher, which I'd like to consider myself a student, and he is going to shed some light on the Clobber Passages and offer us a new perspective. Welcome, Rabbi Mike. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ryan. I love you being on your guys' show and so excited to be here to chat about this stuff. Very, very relevant to what's going on in this crazy world of ours.
Oh my goodness, it certainly is. It's poignant at this moment.
Absolutely.
So, Rabbi Mike, just for people who don't know you, if they've not seen our shows before, forewarning, how long have you been an educator?
Well, I think a formal educator I've been since 2008. But I entered seminary in 2010. And throughout that time, I did student pulpits and teaching at religious schools and religious education. I was ordained in 2015, and I've been educating professionally as a rabbi, as an educator, both in congregations and out, and in chaplaincy and in independent work, and in writing. My book came out last year, and so I guess, wow, it's been a while.
Oh,
I would
wow.
say
Yeah,
15 years,
long
something like
enough.
that. So I love teaching, and certainly adult education is my favorite. The idea of bringing adults to the adult table, graduating from that Sunday school ideas of puppies and rainbows, of Noah took all the things on the ark. Like, that's a great story for our
Do
kiddos,
I
but
do?
yeah. But when we're adults and we have to look at things from a little bit differently, that's really, and I love creating those aha moments for adults who never dived into this stuff and really get interested. So I'm very grateful to find platforms like this and others like podcasts and social media to be able to
Same.
teach a wide audience.
I agree. So, and I'm, again, somebody who's taken some of your classes, and I just enjoy your videos and your presentation. You have certainly a way with words, regardless if it's brevity or not.
Yeah.
What is it that you would consider yourself passionate about? I know you just said that you enjoy when people have those aha moments. I've had a few of them in your class. Is that what you say is your, like, a big motivation for you, is helping people to, like, bridge those gaps and better understanding of the text?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think for me, education is in its best form when it is transformative, when you leave going, holy moly, how did I not know that? Why didn't anybody teach me that? Well, there's reasons for that. But the idea that it changes your perspective, makes you look back, makes you look forward at the choices that you made and the choices that you will make. And religion has a profound effect on people's lives and the lives around them. And so if we educate and help transform, when we can remove some of these toxic elements of people's lives, the sheltering of people's lives, the danger of being purposely misinformed or things like that. And so those
Right.
aha moments aren't just intellectual sparks. They can actually change a person's view of the world and how they view the other people surrounding them in that world. So it's real work
Right.
we're doing. It's not just in the classroom. This is stuff that affects a large portion of the country and the population, and it's important work. So that, I think, feeling those, talking to people like you and my students who were just like, wow, I never knew this. This changes everything. They tell me their personal stories about how they grew up and what they're going to do now. It's real work that we're doing. And that, to me, those aha moments are truly transformative for people. And that, to me, is what keeps me going in terms of my passion.
Absolutely. I really appreciate how you are bringing information to people who maybe have not been privy to some of these ideas. Again, I can only speak from experience, and a lot of this stuff is very new to me, and I'm coming to understand how complex the ideas are, and it's not always just as straightforward as simply reading the context. And that, for me, was context was just reading a few verses up and a few verses down, and that's what was context. And now I'm coming to find out that there's just so much in people's lives going on behind the scenes, and not just what is black and white written down in a book, and that we're now interpreting, excuse me, thousands of years later. When it comes to translations, there's so many, and to some extent I can understand, because you might want that information accessible to people, and everybody should have access to everything. But with that, how reliable would you say are a lot of these translations of the Bible that we have? How trustworthy that the actual message is getting through? Oh, sorry. Like hey.
I want, this is an important question and it deserves a great answer, but the short answer is,
okay,
it gets worse and worse and worse. That being said, there are good people who are attempting to try to navigate this complex text or groups of texts or manuscripts and errors, and trying to put things together. But if we go all the way back, right? And people who learn with me know that my teaching model is a Jenga tower, right? If you're at the top and you're reading an English translation, right, you have to go all the way down to the bottom and remember Hebrew, right? Hebrew is a beautifully ambiguous language. It is alive, it flows, it changes. Biblical Hebrew, medieval Hebrew, modern Hebrew, and all the steps that go within it. When it is translated, you lose all of that. It could mean, this could mean, isn't that cool? Like, and we Jews are very big on like the what if, right? And questioning about that. When it's translated into Greek or Latin or English, choices have to be made, right? If anyone has ever learned a second language or spoken to a native of another language, and you say, there's a word, you don't really have it, it means this, but it kind of means this, and there's like a whole sentence to define a word, you're not able to do that in writing. You have to choose one word, right? And that sets the translation. Even if it's not really that, you don't know that, you don't get that. And so and every translator makes these choices, right? Now, we're all human, we're not infallible. We have conscious decisions that we want things to mean certain things. We have subconscious decisions that we wanted to, that we didn't know we wanted to. We have agendas based on our theology, what we've been taught. All of that goes right into our choice of translation, whether we like it or not. And then, I'm building my tower here. And then you add the games of telephone, right? Hebrew to Greek to Latin to English, and all of this is lost. I mean, that's 4 different cultures, 4 different types of language, 4 different ideas of culture, and then you have historical distance, and you have cultural repertoire, and then you have hapax legomenon, which is words that only occur once, and you just have to guess. And so finally, you get this English translation that is the best maybe they could do. The Jewish one's different from the Christian ones, and then you've got the ESV and the whatever, all the letters, and but it's just
Acronyms.
like anything else. You need a teacher to guide you through that. Now, and I say this a lot, is that when you were in 8th grade English class or whatever, you needed a teacher to help you understand Shakespeare because you didn't speak that language, right? And no 8th grader said, no, this is what Shakespeare meant. It's I know it. You'd fail that class immediately, right? You don't have no idea of what that time period was, what the idiomatic expressions were, who do you think you are? So when you go into something as big as the corpus of the Bible, right, you need a teacher who is going to teach you the what if and the why and whatever it is. And the problem is, as we get higher and higher on the Jenga tower, you've got teachers teaching these blocks, right, from English to English, or from that interpretation, whatever it is. They're not looking down the entire path and saying, well, in the Hebrew, right? I know Christian pastors who are dear, dear friends, right? They took maybe a couple classes in Hebrew, and then it was Greek, and it was Latin, and it was English, and it was 4 more years of whatever it is. And they come to me and they say, I've forgotten all my Hebrew, right? Which I don't blame them for, right? But if you're going to read a book that was originally in this complex library of this ancient language, you can't read something, even by experts, right, in English and say, this is exactly what it said. There are so many times in the Hebrew Bible where we can translate every word in that sentence, every word in that verse, but it makes no sense when we put those together. There are countless times when that happens. And we need to try and figure out what the heck they were trying to say. Where was the scribal error? Something. And if you're reading it in English, it looks all put together to me, right?
You'd have no idea.
You miss all of that. So translation is a troublesome necessity because people don't study Hebrew and people don't study Greek and all that stuff. And so my job as a rabbi is to accompany you down that road with your English translation and add in some of this unknowns and the what ifs in terms of Hebrew. And if you're not learning through that, you are either deliberately or not deliberately being led down a particular path by a particular translator.
Yeah, they're narrating their...
Correct. That translator is telling you what it means. God isn't telling you that. That translator is telling you what that means. So those who think that it's this perfect text in English, that's absurd, right? I mean, even, that God didn't send that down in the KJV version from Sinai. Like, that's just not how things work. And so I know it's a lot of work. I know it's complex. People don't like to do all that work, but you really have to. You can't just read the Bible as it
I'm realizing
is.
that now.
Nothing about the historical distance. You have to know what was going on, who it was written for, who it was written by, who it was edited by, what was the original audience, what were they doing, what were their morals, what were their surroundings.
So many layers.
And it's just like anything else, right? This is hard work. And that's why experts go to seminary for 5 years and 6 years for their PhD. This is why we study so long, because there's always another, oh, well, then you forgot this thing and you have to throw that completely away. Well, that's, and so I know that can be scary. It can be intimidating to people who just want to read the Bible and just whatever it is, but you're missing out on so much.
Right.
Yeah.
And we've said this many times, like I'm sure there's idioms and puns and all kinds of things that are just kind of getting glossed over that you wouldn't know is there unless you looked into the original language. And
it's true.
I'm realizing that now.
Beautiful passages with hints and clues and puns and things in the Hebrew that you completely miss. There's this, like, the best example is there's this great set of verses from when Moses is dealing with the snakes and Numbers and whatever it is. All of a sudden you get all these S sounds in the Hebrew, right? The author chooses S sounds because it sounds like a snake. You don't get that in the English, right? So
I'm gonna cry. Are you kidding me?
no, I'm serious. There are
I
beautiful things like that. There are beautiful things like that that people miss because they're
Yeah.
reading in a translation. And again, I know not everybody reads Hebrew. It's a hard language to learn, but there is beauty inside that language that is just swept over, that people have, most of the world has just forgotten.
Hmm. And I think that, oh, okay, that is a good question. Is Hebrew an original language or a Philistine dialect?
Well, in the ancient Near East, you had these Semitic languages, a lot of which would sound very similar. So whoever was there in these sort of ancient Hebrew stuff, and you had stuff that came before it, sort of adding into it. My guess is the Ugaritic and the Hittites and the Canaanites and all that stuff had some sort of
Yeah.
dialects. The reason why Hebrew is there is because at a certain point, this became the language of the Israelites and became within the kingdom and the writing. So this became the language and the dialect of the time. But you have all kinds of things like Syriac and Akkadian and all kinds of these other sister languages that were going on, and then you have Aramaic, which comes later. And just like any language, right, like the Romance language today, they're all related in that way. And so Hebrew is one of those, at least ancient Hebrew. And then Hebrew evolves throughout the library of the Tanakh. And then it evolves later into, rabbinic Hebrew. It evolves later into medieval Hebrew until within the state of Israel, modern Hebrew was created using the rules of this ancient text.
Right. I mean, language is always changing, and maybe people just knew this innately. I don't know, but these are the things that I never really thought of to myself. That something, obviously, they're words that we used to use in one form, and now today we use them to mean something completely
Right.
different. Like,
Exactly.
just because maybe we know what that word is that the context in which they're using it? Just questions I never thought to ask myself.
I mean, here's the thing. If you are a world traveler and if you've ever spoken to someone with a different language, you ask them, what's their slang? Like, what's their, what's their what's their idioms, right? And you get things like, I think it's Russian, like you have the cockroach means you have a sore throat. There's, some, I forget which language in the Middle East, but it's like you have grenades in your eyes, is like you're surprised or something. Like, if you were to read that with no context, you're like,
Right.
what the hell? What the hell, right?
Something wrong with you?
Exactly. The example that I give, right, for us is cat's got your tongue, right? 1,000 years from now, someone reads that, they'll be like, what kind of savage group is this where animals rip out your and they'll be like, and then you have to have a teacher being like, relax. Okay. It means that they're speechless. But that's how the Bible works too, right? And you don't get that in the English because whoever's making that, you have to sort of twist that idiomatic expression so that it's not so funny anymore. It's not so poetic anymore. It's just when you lose that, that stuff, that great writing. I always say there's great writing in the Tanakh and in the Torah, and there's also a lot of crappy writing, and you have to be able to tell the difference. But again, you need a teacher walking with you to show you that.
Well, since we just mentioned English, what about when it's in Old English? How do you feel about the King James version? I do believe it's one of the most popular versions. Why? Don't ask me. I could not enjoy it. But how do you feel? Tell me how you feel.
I have strong feelings about the KJV.
Really?
None of them are good. And I think they're warranted. But here's the thing that I'll say about the KJV. If you have it and you want to be a serious Bible reader, throw it in the trash. That's the first step. First step. I mean, you can do it gently since it's a Bible or whatever, but get rid of it. It is not a serious translation. It is not a reliable translation. It is not a historically built translation. It is besides the fact that it's in Old English, which I guess people like. It sounds like authentic, but people did not speak
Right.
like that in biblical times with the thys and thous. And there are passages that are just absurd. There's a unicorn in there for no reason. There's a unicorn in the KJV.
Right.
And
And that's
if
just
you
bad.
talk to any biblical scholar, they will say it is the worst. It is the most, like, it's a joke in terms of there's nothing helpful in terms of having that. And I say that because when you read the Bible, you have to have a few translations in front of you, right? You should have at least 3 translations with the original, right? Because you have to trust that these translators had some idea of what they were talking about, seeing the differences and the choices and working your way backwards. We don't use the KJV for that because most of it's crap. So I know that that's hard because it's very, very popular, but it's very, very popular for a reason. It's popular because it purposely leads you down a particular path of understanding of what the
Exactly.
Bible should mean. It has an agenda. It has, bias, and it has stuff that is not professionally done. It's not a scholarly work. It really bothers biblical scholars that it's so popular. There are any other translations that are better. So I, of course, recommend JPS. There's the whatever the NSESV or whatever
RVUE, I think.
RV, whatever. Fine. But
LMNOP.
right, exactly. Certainly, in terms of Tanakh, Old Testament, you should use JPS. In terms of New Testament, y'all can do whatever you want, but as that's Greek. But from a Hebrew point of view, if you want to read Hebrew texts, read Hebrew to English instead of going through the telephone of it. You can read the New Testament however you like, but don't put that same filter on Old Testament because you're missing out on that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge problem is we kind of look at these scriptures with that, at least I used to. And I still find myself sometimes already reading something into the text because it's just something I've been told. Might not be in the Bible, but somebody told me that it's connected to some kind of dogma, and I've just carried it with me.
Right.
So if you don't mind, I'd love to start working our way into Leviticus.
Yeah.
Would you be able to, before we look at those, would you be able to, I don't know, set the scene in some kind of way as to like what is happening? Who is this being written for?
Right.
Why? You know what I'm getting at.
I got you.
You got me.
I got you. So if we look at the entirety of the book of Leviticus, if you've ever done like a Bible outline, it's not just by verses and chapters. There's sections in terms of groupings of stories or laws, all sort of put together and things like that. So they've been organized for a reason. The laws are given in an order for a reason. They're bunched together for a reason in terms of context. Going way back, and this is speaking of the Torah, the Bible's, the rest of the Bible is something totally different, but we're talking about the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses. You have to look at those books in a way. First, it's a library, and it's a library that's been sewn together, purposefully sewn together to make sense. Changes were made to make it look like it made sense. Books were slammed together, and things changed to make it work. If you've ever seen a sequel to a movie and you're like, wait, who's this character? Whatever. I thought that character died, right? That's a bad movie. You need some smooth transitions into all those things. So you have, before it is canonized, right? And we don't know exactly when the Torah was canonized, but the Tanakh was canonized somewhere in the 1st century CE, right? So very, very late, which means that throughout the entire history, you've got an evolving Torah, right? You've got people who think one way, people who think another way, and then things are combined. You have the Northern Kingdom writing things, you have the Southern Kingdom writing things, you have other little aspects, things writing things. Who's the victor? Who's the loser? We hate these people. There's a polemic against that thing. And everything at the end, as you get later and later, has to be sewn together, right, for political reasons. And so the original, not the original, one of the original steps of the Torah, what we would call the proto-Torah, probably looked like little bits of Genesis, little bits of Exodus, Numbers, Joshua. And the reason why I say that is because Leviticus and Deuteronomy are different books. They're from a different sort of point of view. The other ones, Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Joshua, have somewhat of a smooth transition in terms of tribal, the Exodus, the wilderness narrative, and then going into the promised land. Then you have other books, Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy was written by a Deuteronomic school, and that book was meant to stand alone. The reason why we know that is for lots of reasons, but some of the blaring reasons is because it retells the stories of Genesis and Exodus, but instead of like from a perspective, it tells them in 4 big speeches by Moses. And you'll notice that there are glaring differences in the stories in Deuteronomy than there are in Exodus and elsewhere, including the 10 Commandments. So for all those people who want to put up 10 Commandments in my school, find out which one.
Hundreds
all right?
of them are there.
Yeah, or just don't and leave our schools. But anyway, and then, so that's not supposed to be there, and then it was slammed together. And there's actually a great lesson about how Moses actually dies in Numbers, and it's supposed to connect to Joshua. It's a great lesson. But anyway, Leviticus is different. Leviticus originally, what we call Proto-Leviticus, was most likely a manual for the priestly class, written by priests, written for priests. It probably did not look like it does today. It certainly would not have thought itself to be put itself in this canon next to Exodus and Numbers, part of the wilderness narrative. It is mostly a book of law, mostly a book of holiness, what is holy, what is not holy, what is pure, what is impure, how to keep yourself on that priestly level of class, of holiness. And those laws still work today in the Jewish community. Kohens cannot be near a dead body, and there's all kinds of these other things that are still very relevant to the priestly class and the descendants of priests. There are sections of this priestly manual that had to deal with purity, had to deal with sexual activity, had to deal with other cultures surrounding them, the big fears, right? And the main thing we have to remember about the priests, the best way, and you can read this all in the Torah pretty easily, is the best way to stay holy is to stay separated from things. When a woman goes through her cycle, she has to be removed from the camp because, bad blood, right? There's bad blood and good blood. Bad blood is menstrual cycles, good blood is circumcisions, right? Blood has a thing, right? Disease has a thing. And then there's power structures, right? Of priests versus Israelites, and higher priests versus lower priests, and
like hierarchy and whatnot.
Hierarchies of all that stuff. So everything, you have to understand all of that before you dive into these laws that now have been crunched into a corpus because a certain group decided that everyone is now accountable for these laws in Leviticus, which is silly, but they are. And remember that these laws, there was never like a place in history where like everyone was just following all these laws, right? A lot of them are a wish list or what you should do or what maybe we'll do when we get into the Holy Land or when the kingdom's built. This is what we hope to do. Most likely it's the priest saying, here's why we're special. We can't own land, but here's why you should pay me, right? Here's how we make money. We do the sacrifices. Don't get near us. And here's why we're special, right? All of that. And if you read there's so much writing on this in terms of priests trying to maintain their political status. And they do until 70 CE when the Second Temple is destroyed and the Sadducees, who were the who was left of this priestly class are gone, and they lose all their power because the temple's gone. But until then, the priests have a very, very specific group of elite literati things that we can do. And so if you take that and then you dive into the laws of Leviticus, things look a whole lot different.
Wow. There's far more happening behind the scenes that you just wouldn't understand. And I've always thought that those laws were for everybody. I had no idea that there was a distinction at one time where these were priestly laws for those people to, distinguish themselves, like you said, maybe earn themselves a living, they're holy, whatever. This is why you should pay me. These are all the things that I can't do that you can do, what have you. And now everybody is beholden to those laws, and they don't even really
it worked, right?
Make a ton of sense. Yeah.
Millions of people believe it. So it worked. People like to think of, the people in the Torah and the Levites as like these morally high ground people, but they're just people just like us, right? There's corruption, there's money, there's greed, there's political ambitions. You have to allow that into your history to understand, like, oh, that makes sense. The priests like not working for a living and like getting paid. So they wanted to stay in power. So here's a book that tells you how to make us money. Awesome. That happens. So, yeah.
So that's how that went down.
That's how that went down.
Why don't we open up our books, open up our scriptures to one of the first ones, which I believe is going to be, am I right? Is it Leviticus 18?
1822.
Right, yeah.
But we can't look at 1822 by itself. We have to look at 2013 as well. Right?
Okay.
And then someone asked before about we wanted to define clobber passages, right? People didn't know what that meant.
Yes, thank you.
So these are typically called the clobber passages because these passages, among others, have been misused, frankly, to cause a great deal of pain to a lot of people and have inflicted physical, emotional, spiritual, mental abuse because of these. And they are the misinterpretations of this or misuse of them have been a detriment to the LGBTQIA and others and other allies and things like that for as long as we can remember. So that's why we call them the clobber passages and why they're so important to teach correctly, because people are, as we know, being taught to hate and taught to exclude and taught to discriminate and thinking that it's godly law to do that and to be imitating your divine godly to hate people. That, if you know anything about religion, is, the opposite of what religion's supposed to do. So looking at the clobber passages here, 1822, 2013, and you have to look at them together because things are not repeated for no reason, right? It's 2 chapters later. Why is it repeated? There's no good answer for that in terms of theology. There is a good answer for it in scholarship. It's 2 books smushed together. The author of 1822
there you go.
liked it. Leviticus 22, they smushed it together. Easy, right? It's not emphasis. It's not like, hey, did you forget 2 chapters ago? I'm going to tell you again. That's not what happens. There is a sewing of ideas and them pushed together by these redactors and the editors. And there are certain reasons. That's a longer conversation of why can't they take things out, right? There's all kinds of contradictions in the Bible, as you know. And you're like, it would be so much easier if you took that part out. But for some reason, they can add, but they can't subtract as easily. We do see subtraction from time to time. But from here, you see this is 2 things smushed together, and they had to keep both of them. So
and this is evident, like we can tell because there's analysis been done. Like, obviously, if we're just looking at it in English, we wouldn't know all that. But if you could read the original language, you'd be able to, some things would probably be a bit more evident, I'm sure.
That's right. That's exactly right. And I want to emphasize that when we're going to look at these two passages, how important it is to remember that there is a depth that needs to be understood in terms of even the English translation. And I say that because our Christian friends love to put all kinds of meaning into passages that, as a Jew, I say that doesn't mean that at all. That there are things that are hinted to. The entire Christian theology is that Old Testament passages predict things out of context. They mean more, right? If you see this, it's a hint to this, right? All of that sort of idea. And that literally builds the prediction theology of Jesus. And so I find it so surprising when these same Christians go back and say, no, it's clear as day. And I'm like, well, what about that Isaiah passage you just said? Emmanuel's not Jesus. And they're like, well, I'm like, no.
That's a wild one.
You can't have it both ways, right? If you're going to say that every verse is clear, then the Christian prediction theology doesn't work. If you're going to say that every verse has a hint to it or is in depth, then you can't say it's plain as day. You can't have it both ways. That's called cherry picking. So as we look at these verses, keep that in mind.
Okay.
If we look at Leviticus 18:22, it's not particularly helpful until we get to Leviticus 20:13, which means that typically my guess is, or scholars' guess is Leviticus 20:13 was written first, right? Because it's more complex and it gives that distinction, right? Either that or 18 was written first and it needed clarity. And so the author of 20 needed to clarify. So one thing we want to pay attention to in 18:22, it says, Ve'et zachar lo tishkav mishkaveh isha to'evahu. So there's some very important words in that, right? The word for a male here that's used is called zachar. And that's a different word that's used to describe a man. A man is typically an ish. And so zachar can mean a man, it can mean a young man, it can mean a different kind of man. The way we figure this out is we do a word search in a concordance of when is zachar used, right? And we see in the context, zachar is used different than it is in ish. Besides the fact, and when we get to Leviticus 20, when we have both of them in the same sentence, right? The ish asher yishkav et zachar. If a ish lies with a zachar, as one lies with isha, a woman. So our Christian friends should perk up and say, wait a minute, they're talking about two different kinds of men. No one uses two words to mean the same thing in a sentence. Nobody, right? That's redundant, right? You don't use that. It's not like they found a thesaurus and wanted to look fancy. They are using, right. What's another word for man? I don't want to say man again, right? No, that's not what's happening here. There is a distinction between a particular kind of man and another kind of man. We only see this in Leviticus 20:13, which gives us clarity to Leviticus 18:22, because it doesn't say v'ish lo tishka. It doesn't say don't lie with a man as one lies with a woman. It says don't lie with a zachar as one with a woman. And then 20:13 says if a man, an ish, lies with a zachar, another kind of man, as one lies with a woman, then they've done an abhorrent thing. And they mean sort of the same things once you read them together, right? The author of Leviticus 18 just assumes that the reader knows what a zachar is. The author of Leviticus 20 thinks you need to know the difference between an ish and zachar. You can have an ish have sex with anybody, but you can't do it with a zachar. There is no way that a Christian should be able to look at this passage and not say, something means something, right? But if you read it in the English, do you get any of that?
No, you wouldn't know.
Right? You don't get any of that complexity.
No
right?
indication.
So the conversation's totally different. They're like, it's clear if a man, what about? They're like, no. What is an ish and what is a zachar? And why can't a man have sex with a zachar? Is it because he's too young? Is it because there's a power dynamic? Is there because there's other, like, those are the questions we should ask. In other words, it's not straightforward at all, right? There's something in terms of dynamics that's going on that we don't understand because we're not part of that culture. The reader at the time got it, understood zachar. We're not going to do that. We don't get it. And so we have to try to figure out, what are they trying to say? And the way that we figure that out, one, like we said, we look in a concordance, we find out when is ish used, when is zachar used, right? Ish is used to describe a man, is to describe angels. Zachar could be a man or a young man. There's different ranks of people. And so you have to, the next thing you have to do is look at context, right? Is what the heck is this around? Because, as you said so beautifully, repeating one of my favorite phrases, Bible verses are not fortune cookies.
Oh, yeah, I like that one.
Rip them out of context and put them on a sign and say, this is what it means. It's absurd. If you were to do that for any other literature, they'd be like, wait, what's the context?
Yeah, people wouldn't stand for it.
Say that.
Right.
Who wrote it and why? And
if you misquoted a movie, like pulled a quote from a movie and changed something, people are like, that's not how that movie goes.
Right.
But with the Bible, it's just like,
So imagine those ancient readers of this looking at us, not us, because, we're fine, but looking at other people saying, pulling these things out. And they'll be like, why is that on a sign? Like, did you even understand what we were trying to say? That's totally misusing our words. And, you didn't get it. This is why everything's a discussion. This is why Jews argue for a living. And there's, this is because we need to understand this stuff, right? So hopefully at that point, you can understand that there's something going on. We should be suspicious, right? And if you go to the next slide there, we should be suspicious about what is going on. There's a couple reasons we should be suspicious, right? This is the only prohibition against man and male sex. And I'm not going to say man on man sex because that's not what it is. Ish and zachar sex. There is nothing about lesbianism, bisexuality, any other LGBTQ lifestyle are not explicitly prohibited. And you can't use the argument from silence of, well, if it's not here, it must have been bad, because there's all kinds of stuff that's not in the Bible. You can't do that.
Exactly.
And it's not like
slippery slope.
Right. It's a very slippery slope. Right. And it's not like this is what I tell my Christian friends in terms of when they are trying to find Jesus in the Old Testament. I'm like, his name's not there. And it's not like the Torah only says a little bit about stuff. It says what it needs to say. If it were there, it would be there. And so if there was a prohibition against lesbianism, you'd have a law right there that says a woman doesn't lie with a woman as one with. It doesn't say that, right? Or, man can't have both. It doesn't say that. And if you believe that lesbianism and bisexuality did not exist back then, well, that's absurd. Of all of these kinds of sexualities existed since the time being. There were bisexual cavemen, for God's sakes. So we have to be suspicious about that. We have to be suspicious about the Ish versus Zachar. Why? Right? We should have to be.
That is very strange.
It is, isn't it? We have to be suspicious about what a to'ava means, right? It means an abomination or a sin or a bad thing, right? Why is it a bad thing? Why is it so bad that this happens, right? What is their moral compass here? And then you have to be suspicious of what some of the word means, right? Mishkaveh ishisha could mean after lying with a woman, not in the manner of. It could mean don't have sex with a zachar after you've had sex with a woman. We don't know. It could mean that, right? It could only speak about anal intercourse, right? Which is not just homosexual sex. That's heterosexual acts too, right?
Right. Exactly.
So who cares, right? It doesn't specifically say that. What's going on in the areas around them at the time. We know that homosexual activity happened since the dawn of time. We know the Greeks were all about it. We know that other nations were fine with it. And as Robert Alter says, like, it seems like this is not a concern for them. If it was, they would have written it there.
It would
It's
have
no
been
big deal.
specific.
Right. It's part of their culture. It's no big deal. This particular pairing of Ish and Zachar is a problem, and we need to figure out what that is. If we expand and take a step back further, a great deal of Leviticus and other laws within the Torah are built with the sole purpose of keeping Israelites separate from their neighbors, right? Remember, they're surrounded by Philistines and Canaanites and Amorites and Hittites and Jebusites, and Babylonians and Egyptians and Assyrians. And I mean, it's a town square, right? Right, exactly. I haven't seen a Hittite walk down the street in a long time, but they're there. And so imagine you're walking into the market and all of them are there, right? There's this great understanding of what the Sabbath used to be. The Sabbath was a market day in these towns. And so there's a theory, a great theory, frankly, that the Israelite Sabbath was built so that they would stay in their homes, so that they wouldn't go out and interact with all those people. Because if you don't interact with them, you don't marry their daughter and you don't worship their God. And what's the number one thing that God gets pissed off about is idolatry.
Yep.
There's all kinds of ways, right? Then you add on kashrut law, kosher law, right? We can only eat these certain things. Why? Because you can't go over to your Canaanite friends for dinner, which means they can't marry your daughter and you can't worship their God.
Right. If they're raising like herds of pig and
Very
things
smart.
of that nature. Wow.
Very smart what they were doing, right?
It is smart.
So if that's the case, right, the Torah is big on separation, right? Big on separating things. It's possible that a Zachar could have been a non-Israelite something, or there's all kinds of possibilities that we could dive into with that sort of thing. So, within the last 20 minutes, we have completely changed the scope of how we would look at these two verses. So much so that if you were to say, no, it's clear, a man can't have sex with a man, you'd be like, did you miss all of this?
Yeah.
And the truth is, yes, because they were taught to miss all this, or not taught this stuff because it didn't fit a particular agenda, right? Studying the Torah is supposed to be sweet and beautiful and fun and amazing because these sort of things happen, right? It's not supposed to pick out, I should hate that person and I should hate that person and that person sucks.
The intention behind it.
Right, exactly. And this is how we read the Torah. And it breaks my heart that other people read the Torah being like, no, this person sucks because the Torah says it sucks. And there you go. They're missing out on so many wonderful intellectual conversations and spiritual understandings and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So
they already have the assumption that they're correct in what their interpretation.
Exactly. Okay. I'm going to put one more layer of what if on there, and then I'm going to take a break because I'm surprised there are not a lot of questions here. There's just the people are just listening, and their minds are exploding. But
yes, their minds are exploding.
Okay. I'm going to add one more layer onto this. There is some wonderful scholarship these days that shows us that the writers of Leviticus, at least parts of Leviticus, proto-Leviticus, what we call the priestly writer, meaning writers who were either within that priestly school or whatever. Also, through Hebrew analysis, usage of words and things like that, we can track were also the authors of Genesis 1, meaning the first creation story. And I'm not sure if you can pull up some of that so that people can see. But in terms of Genesis 1, there was darkness, there was light. the sun and the moon, all that stuff, right? People know Genesis 1. And when you start to look at it as a priestly book written by the priest, you start to notice something about Genesis 1. And that is that the authors of Genesis 1 were extremely specific and intentional about binaries. Excuse me, about binaries, binary language. And when I say that, I mean that everything's got a pair in Genesis 1, in the creation. Darkness and light, sun and moon, sea and sky, earth and water, the sea and the heavens, fish and beasts, and then, yes, man and woman, right? Now, if you were to pull out on that fortune cookie and put it up on a sign that God created man and woman, a man and woman, right? There are some who go as far as to say this is the reason why men and women should only be married, even though marriage isn't mentioned here at all, nor is a relationship between men and women mentioned, just that they were created. It'd be the same thing of saying, well, this means that, insects and cows can't hang out together. But anyway, you have that separation in terms of binaries. And actually, when you start to, if you take a highlighter to Genesis 1, you start to see it really, really easily in terms of what is going on in terms of the binaries of this all, right? So we get to understand that this is the perspective of the priests. And this becomes an understanding of how they view the world. Genesis 1 is built through the creation of order out of chaos, right? Everything is chaotic. God's spirit hovers over these chaotic, dark waters of nothing, right? And all of a sudden, God puts it in order. Everything has a pair. Everything has a category. Everything's that way. That's exactly how the priests live their lives. They mirror God's creation. Everything has a place. Everything has a holy and a not holy, a separate and together. Everything has separation to it. Now, if you go back to the slide we were looking at, in terms of the Leviticus, the next slide, right? The next slide, right?
Oh,
sorry, there you go. Right? And then one more, right? Because we talked about all that, which is great.
Whoopsie.
One more. We've just covered all this. This is awesome.
Jeez,
okay, here we go.
Yeah.
So if we look at that and then we go back to Leviticus, right? Or even some verses in Deuteronomy that are priestly and things like that, you see that that pattern continues, right? Let's look at Leviticus 19:19, right? Observe my laws. This is priestly, right? Remember, heaven and earth, evening and morning, day and night, this is our world. All of a sudden, these start to make sense because before they made no sense. You shall not let your cattle mate with a different kind. Why? That makes no sense unless you understand that the priests are saying, keep it binary. Everything is separated. We don't mix. There's no gray area. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed. Same thing. You got to grow carrots over here and lettuce over there. You can't mix them. Otherwise, that's chaos. We do order, right? You will not put on cloth from a mixture of two kinds of material because that's crazy, mixing polyester with cotton. That's chaos, and that's not how God created the world. You either wear polyester or you wear cotton, right?
Right.
And those guys wear polyester, and those guys wear cotton.
God separated things.
Exactly. So take that view, put it back to the Clobber Passages, and you realize this has nothing to do with morality. It has nothing to do with being homophobic. It simply deals with how Leviticus priests saw the world. You don't mix these things, right? Homosexuality is not a problem in biblical world. They don't care. They could care less about it, right? Either it's some sort of power dynamic or whatever, but the point is we are seeing two different words, right? Heaven and earth, moon and sky, ish and zachar. You don't mix them. That's it. There's nothing malicious about it. There's nothing terrible about it. You just don't mix. And here's the thing. We don't hold that crazy view of the world anymore. So let it go. You
What
can
is the
mix it.
rationale behind that? And I've heard people say, well, we're keeping the morality laws. There were no such thing. That's a
No,
post-biblical
that is
idea, right?
that's an inserted interpretation to say that these are moral and other ones aren't. There's all kinds of morality
Or who
laws
says who,
throughout the
right?
Torah.
Yeah.
You can't just say, well, these are the moral laws. According to who, right? The priests sure didn't think they were moral laws, but you do. Congratulations. And then there might be verses that you don't think are moral, but the biblical authors did, right? So that's again a interpretation from the top of the Jenga tower, not from the bottom, right? If you're looking at it in English and you're like, rah, 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 and I have this perspective, yeah, sure, you can make up a distinction, a category of morality or not, but you're way up there. You're missing everything down here in terms of what are you talking about? The priests didn't care about that. The priests cared about a binary world of order, and that if you mess it up, God comes in and destroys it, right? Chaos is the enemy of the priests, right? Okay. The last thing. No, I'm going to take a break. Okay. How are we doing so far?
Good.
It's 5:27.
Somebody said something that I just thought was funny. Logan Fisher said, wouldn't that mean homosexuality is the only proper form of connection? Why mix the sexes?
Right.
I love that thought process.
Listen, there is an argument to be made here, right? Unfortunately, the first commandment in the Torah is be fruitful and multiply. So the idea of heterosexual sex for the reason of procreation dismisses the idea that men should only have sex with men and women should only have sex with women. But you're thinking the right way now, right? Is what are the categories of the biblical priestly author and why, right? You who are wearing a polyester cotton blend are violating their order of the universe, dude. So you're just as in trouble. But that is the way we should start to think about these things. It's like, what else? What were they trying to say? What were they afraid of? And what kind of world are they trying to create? And then give that the historical distance of like, dude, it's 2023. We don't think that way anymore. So why does it affect you, right? This wasn't written for you. It was written for an audience that understood what an Ish and Zachar was. They understood what order versus chaos was, which is sin versus blessing versus abomination versus holiness. You don't get any of that. It's not written for you. And once you understand that and humble yourself that way, you start to really read into it and say, wow, what was going on? And what else can I learn about this? And, that's the productive biblical study that I try to instill.
I feel as if, I think I said this to you in our chat, but I just feel as if my religion that I left for sure, and I know a lot of Christianity, is just very lazy with their scholarship, with their academics, with even wanting to know more. They already have their story, they already have their narrative, and they don't care to deviate from it. I mean, they just bold-faced will say, nope, they still think that verse in Leviticus still pertains to them, even though the rest doesn't. I'm going to keep a hold of my weaponization of these verses because it fits my agenda.
Right.
And it just, to me, is blatantly clear that they're doing it just to prop up their hatred.
Right.
It's inexcusable at this point because we have this scholarship to prove like everything you just went through for the past hour.
Right. And the thing is, I want to mention that, listen, there are great Christian biblical scholars. There are secular biblical scholars. What's important is where you start. If you're starting from halfway up the tower, you can interpret stuff, but you're ignoring all the history behind it. And if you're starting at the top of the tower and starting to make laws, as people are, based on the top of the tower, then you are not really you're not really a biblical expert. You're not a biblical scholar. You are taking a particular perspective and building a Jenga tower on top of it, right? And there's productive ways that that's happened, and there's non-productive ways that's happened. But the minute that I start to talk and slide out that stuff, and then this and this and this, that tower starts to wobble. And guess what? The same problem that we had before, greed, politics, power, arrogance, all that stuff comes in. They're like, this guy can take our power away. Let me lash out at him, right? He's just a Jew, and he's just one, right? That's the number one response in terms of, have you ever thought about this, right? You can't be right about this. Otherwise, my entire world crashes down.
Yeah.
But the problem is, have you ever played Jenga? It's supposed to be fun and funny when the tower falls. You're not supposed to cry yourself to sleep when the tower falls.
Right.
Your life isn't over, right? That's the same in terms of learning about the Bible. Your life isn't over when the tower falls. You just have to start anew and start another game and build it from the bottom this time. And that's not a threat to your faith. That's not a threat to your institution.
No,
it should build and make it even better, because now you know even more about it. And that's what my book is about. That's what my teaching is about, is I'm going to make you understand more. I'm not going to take things away from you. I'm giving you more information to help you shape your religion and shape your faith. I don't know why people are so scared about it. Well, I do
like the Bible more now, though. Like,
right.
I could actually probably talk about the Bible all day, practically every day, because now I feel like I'm getting somewhere. I'm learning something. I'm understanding better. Whereas before, I just felt like everything was force-fed to me, and all the questions I have are just, how dare you have questions? I'm telling you how it is. You need to just accept the answer. This is much more interesting to me to look through the language and, shuffle through all that. That makes the game more interesting, I feel.
I totally agree. And the other thing that we have to mention is that you have to have a certain amount of strength to do that, right? You have to have a little bit of stamina to be able to, like, listen, when I went into rabbinical school, I thought I knew great stuff about the Torah. It was torn down in front of me. It was destroyed in terms of my assumptions, right? Ooh, thank you. Thank you, Vanna White. The assumptions are just right. I would leave all those classes thinking, wow, I'm so much smarter, and wow, I'm dumb at the same time.
Like, oh my God, there's so much I don't know.
That's an amazing feeling to go in like, holy crap, I know this now. That's amazing. I'm so smart. Who else doesn't know this? And then also like, how the crap did I not know this? What, I'm so stupid. And then that's okay. You have to be able to deal with that. And people who have a strong faith do deal with that. And they build their faith and they hold on to their faith. People who have faith that's built on sand or held by a thread, they freak out and they lash out. They get angry. They don't know what to do with their lives. They've built this sort of very frail shelter around them. And it takes just one little tap and out it goes. That's not a strong faith, right?
No.
Blind faith isn't a strong faith. Banning books isn't a strong faith. Saying we can't learn this isn't a strong faith. A strong faith is where you can get all that information and say, my faith changes, it evolves, because I have strength in these things. The truth is, most people don't have a strong faith. Most people have a pretty weak faith because it's built about other things, right? The institution is important. The hierarchy is important. The obedience, the creeds are important, right? Not the what ifs and the what does the text really mean, the power behind it. And if you take away the power, then all of a sudden you start to think for yourself, and that's very dangerous to weak faiths. So I know that this stuff can be heavy, it can be scary, right? But it's productive discomfort.
I agree. Yeah. that's where you learn. Sometimes I'm embarrassed, like I make mistakes, like, oh shit, but that wasn't right. But
Right.
yeah, and all honestly, like I mean, it happens. I make a video, I'm like, oh crap, I got that wrong. But you know what?
Right.
I learned from it. Sometimes embarrassment is a good motivation. Like, oh, I'll make sure I research a little bit more thorough.
Right.
Logan asks, what do you mean by faith? I guess everybody has
Um,
their own definition. Huh?
so you're right. It's a loaded word. It's a 4-letter word. I'm using it in as sort of like a place setting for a relationship with your religion, in terms of your relationship with God, your understanding of your place in the world, right? This is very different from, I'm not a big fan of the word faith.
Yeah, me neither.
I was until I met missionaries, because uh,
Boom.
because they use faith as an answer, right?
Right.
Not
That's how
a
I was indoctrinated.
Right, not an exploration of whatever. Right, a person's faith isn't blind obedience to your
They're not
leader who tells you what
exploring.
it is. Right.
Mhm.
What is your relationship with yourself and a higher power, if there is one? And it's fine if there isn't. Right. What is your relationship with the people around you? Your faith in humanity. Right. Where is you in terms of your place in the world and your existential experience and all that stuff? That's what I mean. I don't mean like when I said to a Christian missionary, hey, if Jesus is the son of God, then why does it matter that Joseph, who isn't his father, descends from the messianic ideas of David? And they paused for a minute and they said, faith. I'm like, okay, well, that's crap.
There
Um,
you go. That
that's not
answers
good enough
everything.
for me, right? That's not good enough for me. If it's good enough for you, then that's not about faith. That's about power, right? You know, obey this, or you're not in the club. You're not in the tribe. So yes, but thank you for the question. I hate that word, but I do wish it was not so co-opted, because it can be a beautiful concept of where we are in this world and our views of ourselves and our
Mhm.
relationships to the things around us.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe the way that I was indoctrinated to have faith was, it was just like like you said, it was just a place filler. It was an answer when you couldn't find an answer. Oh, you just got to have faith that that's true. So
Right.
you have to have a lot of faith, and if you need to have evidence, then it's not really faith. Well, no, I mean, I should be able to explore my own personal relationship. Like, that's how I was brought up. You're supposed to
Right.
have your own personal relationship that you build with God. How am I able to do that if every time I ask a question, it's just, you got to have faith that it's true?
Right.
Why can't
Faith.
I explore that further?
That answer is the end of the discussion instead of
Except,
the
yes,
beginning of
it's a thought, shuts
right.
it down.
Correct. It shuts it down. Right. Listen, Galileo had faith, right? But he also had a very critical mind and wanted a little bit more, right? So they killed him. But the idea is that, right, there should be no one sentence or one word answer to these complex questions. It doesn't exist anywhere else, right? If you were to ask a scientist, how do we know that we go around the sun and it's not the other way around? They're not going to tell you faith. They're going to say, well, we've done this and we've measured this and we understand the rotation, right? And we trust
It's
those
complex.
experts to say, I don't need to know all that, but I need to know that, what's important there is that the earth goes around the sun. Um, that's the same way in terms of biblical scholarship. If you want to dive down into it and understand why, do it. But no one's going to stop you. If someone stops you, they're not on your side, right? They don't want you thinking and growing. Um,
They're afraid
if
of something.
they're
They're
exactly they're
they're afraid
afraid
of
of
you
losing
finding
you.
something out. Yeah,
Right.
and the thing is I'm just not that kind of person. Like, I just like
Right.
the truth. I could have stayed in my religion simply because I was friends with people.
Right.
But because those relationships are built on the fact that I have to have faith and I have to do things in a certain manner, that isn't possible. But I think in a perfect world, we might end up going to church, but it's just because we want to see people. We might not really believe everything that's said. But you can't really do that in high control religions. It doesn't work that way. There's not dissent. you can't
Right.
you can't dissent in a high control religion. It just doesn't work that
Right.
way.
Exactly. Yeah. Listen, I mean, people go to synagogue for community. That's huge, right? You're surrounded by Jews and you're feeling part of something, and that's great. But if you just go to synagogue and you don't go to class the next day, then you're just doing part of the work, right? The community part, the worship part. You're not doing the study part. And so that's why I want you to do the study part. And then you can go back to the worship part, right? And do whatever you want, worship whatever religion you want, but come to class so that you're not just repeating the same thing over and over again, and you're learning and you're growing. And unfortunately, those mega churches out there don't have classes, right? They have, the 50,000 people who just
regurgitate.
Right.
You swallow what they're regurgitating.
Right.
And then regurgitate that back up when somebody else asks.
Right.
It's the centipede
Or
regurgitation.
Right. Or they're teaching from the top of the Jenga tower. And then you're just getting like,
that is what they're doing.
And that's not fair to you. They're only giving you the top, the shallows of it, right? I mean, we are built to be curious creatures, right? We want to go down to the depths. We want to explore the deep oceans and the outer space and the frontier and all that sort of stuff. Listen, there was a time when people drew, right, there be monsters or whatever on maps, right? And you don't go there because you believe that there's sea monsters there, when really they just didn't want you to go into their spot, right? Stay out of there, right? So there's always an answer as to why you want to learn and you want to grow. And there should never be a just, well, he told me not to. My preacher, my rabbi, my priest said, don't read that. That's not healthy. That's not who we are. And so my hope in terms of these sort of discussions is to inspire people to ask questions and say, but what about this? And to realize that the answers that you're getting are not satisfactory. And if they're not satisfactory for you, then why take it? I mean, why not go dig deeper? There are people out here like me and others who will help you down that rabbit hole. Well, join us down here. We'd love to talk about it.
Come on down. We're having
fun down
at this party.
Like, seriously, we have been down here for a long time. We would love some company.
Yes.
Come and join us.
We're in the
because we're not even halfway down. Like, there's stuff that we still don't know. We want to hear your thoughts.
The beautiful part is that the archaeology is giving us so much more insight.
Stuff appears every day that changes our views and history. It's incredible, right? You got to read the archaeological journals and the magazines and biblical archaeology. Like, otherwise you're behind. And some of the theories that I used to teach 5 years ago have been completely swept away by new evidence. And every time that happens, I'm not mad about it. I'm just like, holy crap, this is awesome.
Right. I'm more.
Let me go teach this.
I'm
so excited to teach you that I was wrong 5 years ago. That's what science is, right? Is you were wrong 5 years ago, and that's okay, because now we found new stuff, and we might be wrong in another 5 years, but here's all we know. That's so cool. But if you're just like, I don't know, that's what he said, that's so boring. Like,
dude,
I
agree.
I don't live like that. And there are personalities who are more drawn to that than others, but we find each other. You and I found each other, and other people find each other in terms of being like, I got questions,
Yeah.
And those are my people. But I want to pull more other people to be like, it's safe in here. You can ask whatever you want.
And don't be afraid of what you're going to learn. Like, keep your mind open. I know at times I go into things with bias, something that I feel I'm going to find, and I don't. And sometimes I am disheartened that I didn't find like confirmation to my thoughts. But I still learned something. It's still a learning experience. I'm, more well-rounded in the subject. So, just sometimes it might be futile, but that's okay. There's still a lesson learned. And I I never thought that I would be so open-minded, but again, now it's just I feel like I am kind of an archaeologist. I'm not, but like I'm just digging through stuff in my own way, doing my own research to the best of my ability. And I will say, I know that it is difficult sometimes. Like I will do just like a little Goog search for something, and sometimes the answers are absolute shit. I
Yeah.
I'll give you that. And it takes me hours sometimes to even find something that's legit that might give me some resources, because that's what I'm looking for, is to get to the source of the, the book, the paper, the article, whatever, to find the information. And it can be tedious, but it is really rewarding. So again, I just feel like I'm doing my own little digging around. So come dig with us.
Right on. I see a question to keep us on track here.
Yes.
So, one, I want to make sure we're talking about Zachar, because the Zohar is a book of Jewish mysticism. So don't use
I
Zohar.
think that's what they mean. Zahar.
Zachar. Yes. So the question is, does Zachar mean boy in Leviticus passage? And they talk about pederasty, meaning sex with younger people. There is some theories about this regarding pedophilia and that sort of stuff. I'd have to say, from an understanding of culture of the time, probably not. Child marriage was a big thing. Age consent didn't exist back then. Fathers were having sex with daughters and raping their, all the whatever it is. So the morality stance that we have in terms of pedophilia, as we talk about it now, in terms of older men and younger boys, was not necessarily like a taboo thing. It is, I will tell you, it is possible that the Ish and Zachar relationship is one of age. That is possible. More likely, it is a relationships of power dynamics, which is also a part of pedophilia. And I want to make sure that I acknowledge that in terms of who's got the power and who doesn't. That could be age related, or it could be status related. It could be class related, all these sort of ways. I don't believe that there's a great deal of understanding to say that it's definitely a man and a boy. Zachar has meant a young boy in certain passages, but it's also meant an older boy. And so I don't want to say one way or the other. But I think, again, it's better to talk about it from a power dynamic point of view rather than age point of view, because you have to go back to the historical distance where age didn't matter a lot, right? And the morality and sexual rules that we use in the 21st century didn't exist back then. And so what we consider pedophilia or incest or rape all meant different things back then. As hard as it is to get into that mindset, we have to understand the cultural repertoire that they were living in, and it is not the same as today, right? That it is not whatever people say everlasting in terms of you can read it and it relates to your whole whatever it is. This was a particular culture and a particular understanding. So maybe is what I would say, but I'm safer from a scholarship point of view saying that it's most likely a power dynamic more than an age dynamic. But it's a good question.
Non-believers ask, could it be a state of mental development?
In terms
So hard to say, probably.
Right, that's hard to answer. I mean, but these are the questions we should be asking. What kind of power dynamic are we talking about? Is someone with full capacity, someone with delayed? It's possible, right? Maybe it related to all kinds of these things. That's the cool part. I don't know, but
yeah,
but that's a great question, because it's
really
possible that a person of higher status, higher class, higher intellect, higher capability, taking advantage of someone, whether by their age, their mental capacity, their status, right? It's a power dynamic of higher and lower. That may have happened. That may have been a situation where that have occurred, but I don't have any proof of that. I don't have any evidence of that in terms of writings within the Tanakh or outside that I'm aware of. But that's why people write journals and articles. Go find it. Go find something from the time in the ancient Near East about mental delays and deformities and all disabilities and that sort of stuff, and see what they did. And maybe that will lead you to a path of like, hey, go back to Leviticus 2013 and there you go. That's the cool part.
It really is. That was a really good question. Thank you so much for that one. And I do want to also thank, I think they already left, Farron, but thank you, Farron, for the super chat, and also Dan D. We truly appreciate that on the channel, because we're just plugging along here. There it is. Thank you. I think Farron took off already, though. I think I saw them leave. Do you need to go, Rabbi Mike? I know we've been here for 1:20. I don't want to keep you for too long.
I'm okay. I also want to be aware of people's time and attention spans. So we've done an hour and 20 minutes of heavy learning. So usually at this point, I think people's eyes might glaze over, or it might be too much. They need to sort of reflect. And so I want to make sure that we are respectful of our students as well. And I think maybe, I will come back if there are other times, as you know.
Good teacher.
Thank you. I want to be aware of that. And so at 1 hour and 20 minutes, I think it's a great time to wrap up.
I mean, honestly, I think that would be a good show to do Sodom and Gomorrah, because now that you've even given me some more information, some inside stuff that I hadn't realized. Again, there's stuff in the there's stuff in the Hebrew that brings to light what is truly happening, or at least maybe telling us that we don't realize we know what's happening. We just assume we know what's happening. That might be a great show idea. Thank you so much, Logan. And come back and just go through the entirety of the story, go through some of the Hebrew, and fight some of those misconceptions, again, that are now attached to anti-LGBTQI rhetoric. Okay, awesome. That sounds really good. Yeah, that sounds great. Oh, thank you. And Grumpy, thank you so much. We really do appreciate it. Well, is there any thing that you'd want to close out with before we go? I also want to make sure that people know where to follow you, make sure they know that you have a book, that you do classes all the time. You recently just did LGBTQIA class. Was that was a part two, or
that was the religious hypocrisy part of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very easily findable. For now, I'm on Twitter, but it's looking like that's going down the drain. But it's
Rabbi God, Harvey. I just
it's terrible. So I'm also on Instagram, Rabbi Michael Harvey. Go to my website, rabbimichaelharvey.com. There's nothing complicated about this, right? Just Google my name.
Who are you?
And you will find me. And if you're interested in this stuff and these perspectives, my book will help you with that. It's a quick read. It's 200 pages. Non-exhaustive. It's just something to get you started and get those juices flowing. You can get it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or whatever it is. But otherwise, if you follow me, I'm on this show. I'm on other podcasts. I do my own teaching sessions. Please join us. Allow your curiosity to come and add beautiful things to our conversations and add questions, because this is what we live for. These sort of moments of aha and transformative education where people can say, wow, I learned a lot. This changes. This is the work that we do. So you are never bothering me. Send me emails, send me DMs, send me messages, send me texts, whatever. I will always answer your questions. This group knows me. They, if you need any of my contact information, they can send you everything. But I truly appreciate all our listeners and our students, and for you guys to giving me this wonderful, wonderful venue to just ramble on about the things that I love to teach about, to nerd out. So thank you so much to the Women Atheists UNLOAD. So appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure to have you on. You are always bringing a new side, new perspective that I haven't thought of. And again, just like you said, when we have discussions and conversations, we can ask the questions that need to be asked. Like, I think that just as like an XJW, I just assumed that all these questions had been asked and all these great people had gone over it and found me. No, they sure as shit didn't. Oh,
Right.
no, they sure as shit didn't.
Right.
We are now the ones who are asking these questions and trying to find the answers. There's going to be so much more that is going to come to light because now we're really doing the work. We're not doing the work with the Bible in our hand, trying to prove what we know. We're actually trying to see what happened in the context versus trying to read that Christian interpretation. And that's where the knowledge is going to start to expand. So
That's where the fun
I
starts.
love it. That's
Yeah.
where the fun starts. Absolutely. Thank
Thank you
you
so much.
thank you for being here. Thank you to everybody in the audience. Thank you so much for this super chats, you guys. That's like so dope. I need to thank our patrons. If you don't mind, oh god, I got hair on me. That's got to go. I want to thank our patrons before I close out. So I'd like to thank Sydney Davis Jr., Eric Ozolos, Tara S., myself, yes, I'll say myself, Deneen Murphy, Dan D., Michael Wiseman, Kathy Cotton, Cindy Plaza, Sunny Shell, Aaron Colson, Phil Calderon, and Jamie West. We love you all. Thank you for that support. Thank you to everybody behind the scenes doing all this work, organizing everything, putting these shows together. Like, oh my gosh, it's so difficult to do. I know it's arduous at times, but you do it. And then you got to sit here and listen to us yap on for hours. God bless you. So thank you for doing all that behind the scenes work. And, you know, people don't even know who your face is. They got to look at this mug. But we know what you do and we appreciate it. All right, y'all. I think I've covered anything. Anybody tell me if I've forgotten something. Oh, we have other good shows. Okay, so don't forget to check out our other shows on Skeptic Haven. We have Secular Soapbox on Wednesdays. Thursdays, we have The Sunny Spot. Saturday, the Global Atheists and Women Athesis UNLOAD. Obviously, you're watching us here. And then tomorrow, oh Lord, that's right, Dan D. See, y'all are helping me out. Dan D lets me know that tomorrow, Rion, that's me, and James are going to be on the Let's Talk. So the new call-in show is tomorrow. So please call in, ask a JW anything, give us your questions, holler back at us. And now I think I'm finally done and I'm going to close out the show. Okay. Thank you so much, Rabbi Mike. I love it. I love it when you're here. I really do. It makes my night. This discussion sheds so much light on the mistranslations, inaccuracies, misconceptions of the Bible and how they've caused harm. Knowledge is power. And through education and dialogue, we can change some of these harmful narratives and work towards an inclusive society. And thank you to everybody for doing the work. We appreciate you. We love you. I'll see you next time. Bye.
I know you told your friend you're not okay, and tell me what's wrong and why you never said you felt that way. And guess you're trying to stay strong and fake a smile until I look away. But I've known you too long, it hurts to watch your blue eyes fade to gray as you fade away, as you fade away.
Yeah, I'm about to fade away, 'cause every time I wake up I feel like it's mine.